14-inch MacBook Pro is what I would call the perfect laptop. Not just for myself, but also for the majority of you out there. You see, this 14-inch MacBook Pro is not just a 13-inch Pro with a slightly larger display, but instead, it is an entirely new generation of MacBook Pros. It comes out in just a few months, and in this video, I'm going to tell you every single thing that we know about it. Are you tired of running out of local storage for your photos and videos? Well, worry no more, because SanDisk, our sponsor for this video, has a new iXpand wireless charger which will wirelessly charge your phone and also back it up to its built-in 128GB or 256GB of memory. With the iOS or Android app, the backing up process is automatic and fully wireless, and all of your photos and videos will be backed up to it whilst charging. Check out the SanDisk iXpand wireless charger sync using the link below. Okay, so this new generation of MacBook Pros would essentially come with three major changes: a new design, a new display, and improved performance. Starting off with the new design, Apple usually keeps a MacBook design for a few years. The unibody MacBook design was introduced back in 2008, a design that lasted up until 2012 when we got the Retina MacBook Pros. 4 years later, and in 2016, we got the current gen design, which means that the redesign should have technically happened in 2020, but it didn't. I'm assuming that was because Apple was extremely busy with their transition to their own silicon, and they wanted that to be fully out before redesigning the MacBook Pros. Like, imagine if the 14-inch MacBook Pro came out in November with that new design and the new M1 processor. In that case, the buyers would have been like, oh, this is a new design, but they would have forgotten completely about that new processor, because the design is the thing that you see first. And the fact that Apple delayed the design meant that we actually got to see the battery life and the performance improvements that the M1 chip brought to the table. But now that those are out, a redesign is coming, and this is what that 14-inch MacBook Pro will be all about. We've seen this reported by Ming-Chi Kuo, Mark Gurman, alongside plenty of other sources, that Apple will be launching a redesigned MacBook Pro 14-inch and 16-inch this year. And according to these reports, Apple will be using a flat design, similar to the iPad Pro and the iPhone 12s in these new MacBooks. In this video, we'll only be focusing on the 14-inch model. 16-inch will be in a different video, so definitely subscribe for all the details on that. Now, when we take a look at a current gen MacBook Pro design, you might think that they are already flat, and that is true when they're sitting on a desk. But that is just an optical illusion, because the moment you lift the MacBook Pro up, you'll see that it has this massive bulge at the bottom, which is as thick as the entirety of the flat portion. So in reality, the entire MacBook Pro is actually 15.6mm thick. The redesign will essentially remove that bulge, as the MacBook Pro will have a fully flat design. We actually measured each individual part of the current MacBook Pro, from the thickness of the lid, to the rubber surrounding the lid, to the flat part of the body, to the bulge part, and we thought how we could thin all of these out without sacrificing on the durability. So while in theory the body of the 14-inch MacBook Pro could be 5.9mm thin, so the same thickness as the iPad Pro, as it's now fully flat and it has Apple's own processors, which are way more power efficient than Intel's, we've actually made ours 7.5mm thin in order to increase its durability and also to make room for a fan of some sort, as the M1 MacBook Pro did indeed have one, and so I do expect the 14-inch to have one as well, unlike the MacBook Air. We then made the lid 3mm thin, down from 4, which resulted in a total thickness of 10.5mm, down from 15.6. Aside from just making the whole body thinner, probably the second most notable change here is the display. All the rumors are pointing towards a 14-inch display, which got me thinking, is it actually a 14-inch panel, or is it something like 14.1 or 14.4, as the current 13-inch model is actually not 13 inches, but 13.3 inches instead. So I had to look at a bunch of 14-inch laptops on the market, and it seems like all of them have an exact 14-inch panel. So we put an exact 14-inch panel on our concept too. But we had a problem here. You see, one of the only issues with the M1 MacBook Pro is that it looks really outdated. The bezels are very thick when compared to the competition, and that's because, well, they were designed back in 2016. The 16-inch MacBook Pro from 2019 did get noticeably thinner bezels, especially on the sides, but even then, they were still thicker than a lot of the competition. We took the same design language that the iPad Pro and the iPhones were using, with those curved corners and that curved display, and applied that to the MacBook Pro. And with that 14-inch display size, in that 13-inch MacBook Pro body, we ended up with significantly thinner bezels. Oh, and in case you're skeptical about Apple curving the corners of the display on a Mac, I believe that macOS Big Sur is a perfect example as to what Apple actually plans to do next, as every single UI corner is actually rounded rather than flat, pointing towards Mac displays also getting rounded. So we thinned out the bezels, we scaled the display to a 16x10 14-inch panel, but we ran into another big issue. You see, a display like this with bezels these thin and uniform would result in almost no area left for the trackpad, as the body of the laptop would have to be the same size as the screen. So we had to go back to the drawing board. And we came to a 16:11 aspect ratio. In fact, it would be an even weirder number, as we did end up making the trackpad a bit narrower. So if you were to keep the trackpad exactly like it is now on the 13-inch model, then the aspect ratio would be something like 16:11.5 or so. But wait, Daniel, Apple won't be doing such a thing because they've pretty much always been using 16:10 aspect ratio panels on the MacBook Pros. Like, even the first one had a 16:10 aspect ratio. And while that is true, the iPad, for example, started out with a 4:3 aspect ratio and then moved to a wider 4.3:3 with the 2018 iPad Pro. The iPhone started with a 3:2 display and then moved to a 16:9 with the iPhone 5 and then to a 19.5:9 with the iPhone 10. Apple has made big changes to their aspect ratios in the past, therefore it would make a lot of sense for Apple to do it again rather than, keeping those fat top and bottom bezels. And finally, the last big design change that we'll see is the color. So a patent application from December 2020 tells us that Apple is actually looking into a new anodization process that would result in a durable matte black color that would absorb almost all visible light. Something close to Vanta black is what this patent is describing. And that would be sick. But something even sicker would be for you to subscribe, as it's free and you'll get to see more Leaks and Rumors episodes such as this one. Like, how cool is that? We didn't actually make our concept Vanta Black, but we did make it much darker than the current space gray MacBook Pro is, and I really do hope that Apple ends up doing something like this too. I think the 2006 Black MacBook was one of the most beautiful products that Apple has ever created, and I really do hope that they bring it back in some way. Okay, aside from all of these visual changes, are there any others? Well, you might have noticed that there's no touch bar anymore at all. And this was something that was reported by Mark Gurman, that Apple is actually considering removing the touch bar entirely, as they already have prototypes without it. And Ming-Chi Kuo later reported that Apple will indeed be removing the touch bar and bringing back physical function keys. Now, I personally don't like this at all. Like, don't get me wrong, I do think that a touch bar had its own fair of issues, but I don't think that removing it is the way to go. Sadly, it seems like this is what Apple will be doing. And now we have the ports. The new MacBook Pro is expected to feature more ports, so what we did here is that we first added 2 more Thunderbolt ports, 1 on each side for a total of 6. I do use Thunderbolt quite heavily myself, and I usually have 3 ports full, or even 4 sometimes. Not so much since I got my M1 MacBook Pro, as we only have 2 Thunderbolt ports, unfortunately. But aside from that, both Ming-Chi Kuo and Mark Gurman have said that Apple will be bringing back 3 more ports. The first one being the SD card reader, which I'm all up for, as I do miss having one on my current MacBook Pro, but at the same time, newer cameras do actually support USB Type-C transfers. So there's really not a big need for SD card slots anymore, but still, I wouldn't mind having it back. Okay, the second port that's rumored to come back is the HDMI port, and I'm not so sure how I feel about this. And that's because almost all new monitors come with a USB Type-C cable now, and unless I want to specifically connect my MacBook to a TV via a cable, which I never do anyways because newer TVs also have AirPlay, I would pretty much never use that port. Also, you can just easily buy an HDMI to USB Type-C cable and just use that instead. So while I do see why some people might want these ports back, the reality is that the industry has adopted USB Type-C, and I don't think it is a good idea for us to go backwards. But do let me know in the comments what you guys think about this. And now the third port that's said to be making a comeback is MagSafe, and this is something that I'm truly excited for. You will likely still be able to charge via USB Type-C, but you would also have the option to charge via MagSafe, which I would assume would be faster, and because of that magnetic connector, you would be able to trip on the cable itself, and then the cable would instantly disconnect to avoid any damage to your laptop, which is quite awesome. But I do have an issue with this too. You see, when I travel, I like to carry a single charger with me to charge all of my devices, and that charger is a USB Type-C charger. Now, unfortunately, because the iPhone is still using Lightning, I do need to carry an extra Lightning cable with me just for that, but with my MacBook charger, I can charge my MacBook, my iPad Pro, and my Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 2, which is pretty great. If Apple introduces MagSafe, which like I said will presumably be faster, I would very likely want to use that. But then when I travel, I would want to use a USB Type-C charger, so I'll end up owning 2 MacBook chargers, which would be far from environmentally friendly. So I think that a better approach would be just to make a MagSafe version of the USB Type-C port somehow. But once again, do let me know in the comments, what do you guys think? Okay, we're finally done with the design changes, and now we have 2 big parts which the MacBook Pro would also improve on, and those are the display and the performance. So when it comes to the new display, aside from the bigger panel and the thinner bezels that we've talked about before, another big change is the switch to mini LED technology. We've made a full video about this already, which you can watch right here, but long story short, the MacBook Pro's display will be brighter, up to about 800 to 900 nits from around 500, which is a pretty significant increase, making it better for outdoor use, and it will also have a much better contrast. And that's because we now have hundreds of dimmable zones that will be able to individually adjust their brightness, essentially giving us something closer to OLED without the downsides of OLED such as burn-in. And finally, we get the third big change, which is the performance. The new 14-inch MacBook Pro is rumored to come with a brand new M1X or the M2 processor. We've seen a number of reports that this will bump the core count from 8 to 12 cores. But now, thanks to some leaked specs posted by CPU Monkey, on a pre-release sample of the M1X, we learned that the maximum clock speed will remain the same at 3.2 GHz, only that we'll be getting 4 more high-performance cores. So we'll have 8 high-performance cores and 4 low-performance cores compared to 4 high-performance and 4 low-performance that the M1 had. This report also states that the GPU will be getting far better, by not just bumping the core count to 16 from 8, but also increasing the maximum number of external displays supported from 2 to 3. Fun fact, only the M1 Mac Mini supported 2 external displays, and that's because it was the only one to have an HDMI port. So from my understanding, the Thunderbolt ports on the M1 Max can only drive one single display at the same time, possibly due to a limitation with the display controller. And then if you wanted to drive a second display, you needed to drive that through a dedicated HDMI port. If Apple's still having a similar issue, it could explain why they might want to add that HDMI port to the new MacBook Pro. So yeah, that's about it. Some major design improvements with a thinner body, thinner bezels, and more ports. A much brighter display with better contrast and improved CPU and GPU performance thanks to Apple's 2nd-gen silicon. But let me know in the comments, what do you guys think? Are you going to get this 14-inch MacBook Pro? I'm definitely going to get one, and this will very likely be my main computer for the next few years. I honestly don't see any need to upgrade unless Apple changes the design again, which they won't. I think it's gonna take like 4 or 5 years for Apple to change the design again. But anyways, thank you for watching. Give this a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel for more in-depth tech videos like this one, hopefully was, and more Leaks Rumors episodes. I'm Daniel, this has been Son of Tech, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Son of Tech, signing out. Cheers.